withered hand. And what we get from this is simply that the hand was unusable. Kind of like when it talks about withered, it's talking about like a shriveling of the muscles kind of thing. Like a dystrophy, which could be caused by a number of different situations, but for whatever reason his hand was unusable, and it was visibly unusable. So this isn't a situation where you might have somebody show up on crutches or something, and
worse than getting older.
you could physically tell what the ailment was. Okay, this withered hand wasn't a fakeable thing. All right, and I've seen this in a number of movies and skits, and somebody will just hold their hand like this, and okay, I see what they're trying to do, but it wouldn't have just been like that. It was literally, you could tell that the hand had shriveled up, and the arm would have been missing tissue on it. It wasn't something that, oh, you could just hold it still and it would look like that. There were physical signs that people could see. This is equivalent of, well, if sometimes people who haven't been able to walk for a long time regaining the ability to move their limbs and things years later. But oftentimes, because they've had so much atrophy that's happened to their limbs, they can't, because muscles and things have shriveled. So even if they might regain the connection from the brain to be able to move their legs again, they have to go through tons of therapy and rebuild those muscles and things. It's not an instantaneous thing. This is the kind of thing, if you look at his hand, and you could tell it wasn't the normal hand, and it wasn't the kind of thing where miraculously being connecting the nerves in it would make it so it'd be able to move again. It had lost muscle, it was withered. Okay? That's important, because it says that they watched Jesus, he's brought into the synagogue, and they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal the man on the Sabbath. And evidently this guy just came to synagogue. He may or may not have been expecting Jesus to heal him, but everybody's kind of watching what's going to happen. And and they're ready. If he does this in a synagogue on the Sabbath day, this is a chance to immediately accuse Jesus. Because by the law of Moses, was it illegal to heal somebody on the Sabbath day? No, it wasn't. By the extra rules of the Pharisees, was it? Yeah, by the extra laws that they'd added on, how dare you heal somebody on the Sabbath day? I think it's important before we go any further, too, to talk about this idea of the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law anyway, right? What was the point of the Sabbath laws? It was a time to set aside and rest and focus on God. And so that was the goal of the Sabbath day. They weren't supposed to be doing work because they were supposed to be resting, and they were supposed to be spending that time focusing on God. It's a useful thing for us to take a time every week where we rest and focus on God. And so that's kind of what the Sabbath day was. All the laws were kind of set aside for that idea. And so was the purpose of the law to keep people from doing good? No. It never would have even entered Moses' mind that it would one day these laws would be used to keep somebody from healing somebody else. And remember, this is in the context of several other discussions with Pharisees that have happened just before this at the end of Mark chapter 2. So they're watching. What's Jesus going to do? And he says to the man with the withered hand, "Come here." He's setting the stage here. Synagogues were not big places. Most of the synagogues around Galilee would have been about the third of the size of this room. So you pretty much, and everybody sat in kind of a horseshoe shape with seats going up. There's nowhere to hide. Everybody would have seen what was going on. Plus, Jesus' purpose in coming to the synagogue is to teach.
So he would have been in a visible, obvious place. And so he calls the guy, come here, and he says to them, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or do harm, to save life or to kill? Jesus reframes the question. Is the point to do good or to do bad? Well, they want to say you're not supposed to do anything. But Jesus reframes the question in a way that there's no way out of this. Well, obviously to do good. And so, but they don't want to say that. They want to accuse Jesus, so they're silent. And there's sort of these moments in the Gospels where the Pharisees get quiet. And they get quiet when it's politically expedient for them. They get quiet when they don't want to get caught in a trap. Notice Jesus' solution to this problem is not to ignore the man or to be quiet. He brings the elephant to the middle of the room. He addresses the issue. Jesus isn't quiet in this situation, but the Pharisees, they've got no way out of this, so they're just quiet. And so he looked around with them with anger. Not an emotion we think of associated with Jesus a lot. But in this moment, he's frustrated with the Pharisees. He's angry at them. They care more about getting Jesus and protecting their own power and their own position than they do about whether or not this man gets healed. That they're actually hoping he gets healed so that they can accuse Jesus. Instead of being grateful for the transformation that could happen in this guy's life. Before we get too hard on them, have you ever been in a situation where you were jealous of something that happened to somebody else? Where you've wished that somebody else might not have a situation because, I mean, we've all had this, right? Where we wished for a bad outcome for somebody. Here they're wishing for a good outcome for the wrong reasons. So he's angry, but he's also grieved at their hardness of heart. They've gotten into the place of where they've so hardened themselves to Jesus that, and to those around them, that they no longer care about the goodwill of those around them. That hardness of heart and that attitude does two things to Jesus. I think they do the same thing to Jesus now that it did to Jesus then. It makes him angry, and it makes him sad. It's interesting to think about how I'm slurring my speech. How our actions can affect God's emotions. But God grieves and is angry with our hardness of heart sometimes. I wonder if there are things that we do times when our heart is hard, that happens. When we overlook what would be best for other people, for our own selfish interests. So he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And the man, we don't know whether when he's saying stretch out your hand, it's not clear in the Greek here whether he's saying hold it out or whether he's saying just open it up. And when he opens it up, he's just miraculously able, maybe it's kind of like saying stand up and walk. Well, I can't, but they start to do it and they can. But he says, stretch out your hand, and he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. Not just that he's given mobility back, but it's restored back to its original quality. Muscles restored. I wonder if that was the hand he used from then on, if it was better than the other one, maybe he had gotten used to using his left hand or something. Now he's right-handed. I don't know. But in front of everybody, instantaneously, the hand goes from withered to restored. It's visibly different.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
This might not be pertaining to this particular, but when Jesus healed a person that was crippled, Pharisees were there, and he asked, should I, and he said, your sins are forgiven. Okay, did he heal that person after he said your sins are forgiven?
He heals the person after he says that.
After he says that.
Yeah.
Would he have, though, I'm saying, what it looks like is he just said your sins are forgiven.
Would that have been enough? Would he have not healed the person later? I don't know. I don't know what would have been on his mind in that situation. But I'll just tell you, God cares a whole lot more about forgiving our sins than about our physical ailments. And I know plenty of Christians whose sins have been forgiven, but their ailments have not been healed. This is one thing that The Chosen does a good job of in one of their scenes, is they have one of the apostles who has an ailment. I don't know if that really happened or not. They're not meaning for you to take that as scripture, so don't, because the Bible doesn't say that. But it is true that there are faithful Christians who have ailments. And the way we walk and the way we live with those struggles is a testimony to other people. Not everybody in the Bible gets healed. The story I always think about is the one where Jesus walks past a whole bunch of people gathered around the pool. And he heals one person and then walks away. Nobody else even realized what's going on yet. And Jesus is already out of there. Why did he do that? Well, Jesus' miracles are pointed and for a reason. Sometimes there's a reason why he keeps us with something. And so here's this withered hand. It's healed. And the Pharisees, instead of saying, they've lost the opportunity to argue with Jesus in front because Jesus preempted them, right? Before he healed them, Jesus set the stage. He gave them a chance to argue before he heals. And so since they were silent during that, all they've got is to go out. And so immediately they went out and they hold a council with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. It's important here to just go over quickly again the groups, the political groups at the time of Jesus here that they had. Every town had most towns had these major three groups, and then sometimes this fourth group. There was the Pharisees. These were the religious legalists. They had extra laws. They loved laws. There weren't 613 laws. There were thousands of laws. And all of the traditions were just as important as the Bible to them. They were showy. They were diehards. They loved to debate how many angels could fit on the head of a pin. That was a real argument. And we have some of their writings today. They were diehards. They believed the letter of the law in Scripture, but they added a ton to it. Then there were the Sadducees. Is that right? I think that's right. Don't trust me on spelling. Trust me on... Well, take everything with a... That doesn't look right to me, but I don't remember. Is it? Does that look right? That looks better. Okay. All right. Anybody remember the little thing, how do you tell the difference between the Sadducees and the Pharisees? Yeah, the Sadducees are sad, you see, because they don't believe in the resurrection. That's true. You should think of the Sadducees as the group that they're more a political group than a scriptural group. They're not sure how much of the Bible is accurate. Remember, the part of the Bible that they have is the Old Testament. Specifically, they hold in high esteem Moses' first 5 books. They're not sure how much of that really happened. They're mostly a political group, but they had a lot of power. The high priest at the time was a Sadducee. And so when you hear the that was an odd thing. We think of the Sadducees and the Pharisees. There's this group. It's almost like that's the full name of the group, Sadducees and Pharisees, right? It's kind of like this part in American history. Originally, there wasn't a Democratic Party and a Republican Party. Originally, we had the Democratic Republic Party. Did you know that? And they were running against the Federalists. And then eventually they became just the Democratic Party for short. And then later on, another party started called the Republican Party. And so that seems weird to us, right? That there was a party. Imagine somebody starting a party now. We're the Democratic Republican Party. Well, what? What? That's kind of how people would have seen it for the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Yeah, Helen. Right, yeah, when it says they didn't believe in the resurrection, it's not talking about the resurrection of Jesus. None of them believed in that. It's saying they didn't believe that ultimately there would be a resurrection, ultimately that there was life after death. They believe you go in the ground and that's it. Right, exactly. Sadducee. They didn't believe in any kind of resurrection. And the Sadducees were kind of the leader of a group called the Herodians. But Herodians was kind of the broader term because it referred to everybody. It wasn't just those in political power. The Herodians were anybody who worked with Herod and the Romans. Sometimes they were called the Hellenists. They collaborated. Hellenists because Helen of Troy, the Greek culture, which was equated with the Roman culture at the time. I don't know why they. But you got to understand, the Romans were in power, so they were speaking Greek because the Romans kept Alexander the Great's Greek language as the language of trade and stuff. They had inscriptions in Latin and stuff, but everybody used Greek. Anyway, Herodians were collaborators. They were the people who were going along with the Romans being in power. So they worked along with Herod. Just like Herod the Great, they were working along with the Romans. All right? Herod the Great at the time, he had a bunch of sons who got the title Herod, and so there were Herods all over the place, and they were a family, a messed up, convoluted family who traded wives and did all kinds of weird stuff. But they were, as a group, the Herodians, and the people who were like the Herods were the Herodians. All right? And then there were the Zealots. A lot of people remember the Zealots because of Simon the Zealot. The Zealots were that is correct. I hope. The Zealots, but there was more than one of them. They were the ones who wanted to kick out the Romans. You can think of them like the French resistance in World War II. All right? You couldn't go around saying, hey, I'm a zealot. All right? You wouldn't do that because they carried knives with them and they were ready. Moment's notice, Messiah shows up, we're going to kick the Romans out of town, and if we get a chance to stab a Roman soldier, we'll do it. Those were the Zealots. They were, I've seen some grimaces and frowns, like I'm saying something, yeah. No, well, it doesn't say, but you don't think Peter is because Simon was a zealot, and it says. So it's a different Simon. Simon the Zealot was one of the disciples, and evidently he was the only one who was from that. This wasn't a big group of people. I mean, it was big, but it wasn't like these were four equal size groups. The Zealots were a smaller group, and they were working in secret. A lot of people probably were just run-of-the-mill, apolitical, like, I'm just waiting it out, all right? And then there's one final group, and that's the Essenes. The Essenes were religious fanatics who they believed that what you should do is get out of the whole thing, go into the desert, and live away from it all. And they were kind of like monks before Catholicism sort of thing. Okay? There's more to it than that. Most of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we believe, were from the Essenes. And anyway, so here you have this remarkable moment. Jesus heals this man with a withered hand, and the Pharisees immediately go out and they meet with the Herodians. By the way, natural enemies, wouldn't have agreed. This has been like Democrats and Republicans getting together to get rid of somebody, all right? They get together and they're like, look, he healed a man on the Sabbath. Oh, and he's threatening us all. He's bad for the Sadducees. He's bad for the Pharisees. He's bad for all of us. Even the Zealots don't like him. Nobody likes him. Let's get rid of him. Jesus cannot be plugged into any of these categories. He made all groups mad. Any leaders of any of these groups would not have liked Jesus. And so it's just this remarkable moment. Here's Jesus bringing people together to conspire against him. But the main thing to get from this story is, one, we have this tendency to ignore major differences because of minor disagreements. I've seen this time and time again where people ignore big things. Something small becomes so important to people that they're willing to let it dictate the rest of what they believe. I'm thinking of so many examples, but I'm trying to pick one that would be... Well, okay, I'm thinking about a church. There was a fight over the music, of course. And they left that church and went to a church that believed completely different things, but played the same songs. I'll just tell you, that makes no sense to me. That you'd leave your whole theology because there's something surface level that's the same. Now, I understand. I think music is important, and definitely a lot of thought should go into that, and I'm not trying to minimize that as an issue, but I'm saying leaving your whole theology over one little thing doesn't make sense to me. So here you got these people. They're willing to compromise on all of their Pharisee and Herodian beliefs, which is like oil and water, but we're willing to get along because he healed on the Sabbath. One withered hand guy can now play guitar or whatever. All right. Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the Sea of Galilee, and a great crowd followed from Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem and, I don't know how to say this, Idumea, and from beyond the Jordan, and from around Tyre and Sidon, a great crowd heard all that he was doing, and they came to him. This is like taking a big circle around all of the surrounding areas and saying these people traveled from all of this way, down south by Judea, from across the Jordan, and now what is now the nation of Jordan, from way up north. They all came in to see Jesus, a huge crowd of people. And he told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd, lest they crush him. It's literally such a crazy crowd that to control the crowd, Jesus teaches from a boat, because that gives a restriction to where he can teach people, but they can't crowd in him. So you can imagine this crowd of people. The Sea of Galilee is like a bowl, kind of. There's hillsides sloping up all the way around it. And so if you point at a map, and you're probably going to hit a place that would have been a good place for people to gather up on a hillside facing the lake. It was just, there's natural amphitheaters there. And so you got this great crowd. He's teaching from a boat. And why is this crowd here? It's because he healed many, and so that all who had diseases pressed around him to touch him. And wherever Whenever unclean spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." And he strictly ordered them not to make himself known. And so the way Mark has this, the next thing he includes in here is the choosing of the 12. And so you kind of see what's happening here. The 12 come in, and one of their jobs is crowd control. One of the jobs of the 12 becomes ushering. And so, whose job is it to feed the 5,000? Well, here Jesus passes out the food, and then they walk through the crowds of thousands. And they do this, people wonder how Jesus preached to a whole lot of people. The Chosen does this well as well, because they show how Jesus could teach something, and then having disciples stand farther out, they repeat it and yell it again to the group after, and then the group after yells it out further. There are places where one person could speak to a crowd in the Galilee basin and have it be heard, natural amphitheaters. But that's another possibility for a way that might have been done. But notice the people are following him not because of a desire necessarily to take up their crosses and follow Jesus or something like that. They're doing it because they want to be healed, and they want to, and they're not even waiting in line to do it. They're crowding up on him and just grabbing him to get healed. And so he says he went up on the mountain. There's a gap here. Mark remembers the Reader's Digest version, and so Mark's zipping through these things. But at some point, after there's been this great crowd following, and they've had all these moments, he went up on a mountain, and he called to him those who he desired, and they came to him, and he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, so that they might be with him, and he might send them out to preach. So the two jobs of the disciples, their job is to grow in following him, to be with him, and then to go out and to teach it to other people. And he is going to give them the authority to cast out demons. The other Gospels tell us that this is after a night of prayer on the mountain that Jesus calls the 12 disciples up. And it tells us that he gave them the power to cast out demons and to heal people. Can you imagine Fisherman Peter or Fisherman Andrew? And Jesus says, okay, you now have the power to heal people. Go out and preach the things I've been teaching you. And he goes out and he preaches and heals the first person and wonders if it's going to happen. It must have been a weird moment. Can you imagine if God suddenly gave you the power to do a miracle? And said, okay, go find some blind person and make so they can see.
But one of them couldn't cast out a demon.
Well, that's another story, yeah. But in general, they had the ability to do that. They were surprised when they weren't able to. In fact, evidently, they get used to having this power. It becomes a normal, everyday thing for them to be able to heal people. I want you to notice how many of all of Jesus' followers had this power at this point? 12. This wasn't something that was expected for every person following Jesus at the time to have. Was not the ability. This was something that specifically was for these 12 disciples. And he gives them the name apostle. Apostle just means somebody who's been sent. It's interesting, like the word deacon means servant. And so diakonos is sometimes used to refer to a servant. And sometimes it's used as a title deacon, an office deacon. So here we have apostle. How many of us are apostles? All of us have been sent. We're all apostles, but we're not big A apostles, big A, little a. We're not big A apostles, right? So the difference between elders and elders. There's some elders in this room. I'm not going to say who you are. It's not for me to say. But there's some elders in here, right? But when you use elders in that sense, it's just little e. But when you use elders as somebody who has the official office of an elder in the church, it's capital E, because that's a office. But the word means both those things. Same thing with apostles. He sets aside these 12 to have this role as big A apostles. And here's the list he gives. He appointed the 12: Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter; James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Boanerges, which is sons of thunder. However you say that, I don't know. Andrew and Philip, Bartholomew and Matthew, Thomas and James the son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus and Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. At this point, though, his name is just Judas. Judas Iscariot. He doesn't have the betrayed him yet on his name. In fact, he would have just been one of the normal guys.
Did Jesus know?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. He knew ahead of time, and he says it. Well, that gets she asked whether Jesus knew when he chose Judas. That gets into a question of how much awareness Jesus had of some of the things that he was doing. There are things that Jesus... All right, let's do this real quick. There are some things that Jesus does not know. Surprises people, but Jesus says it. He says, nobody knows the hour. I don't know the hour. God knows the hour. Is he saying that he's not God? No, Jesus makes it clear in other places that he's God. The Father knows the hour. I don't know the hour. Well, wait a minute. God's all-knowing. Jesus is God. How come Jesus doesn't know everything? It's limits. And the way I understand the incarnation, how does Jesus, fully God in a human body, the way I best understand it are two illustrations. One, if you've ever had a dream that you were a child and everything's big around you, or had a dream that you're paralyzed or something. Anybody ever had dreams like no, none of you dream. If you ever have a dream like that where you're a child and there's things that you can't do that you could do as an adult, that you can do in real life, but in your dream you can't do them. All right, understand that concept? There's a sense in which Jesus becoming a human being might have been like that. Not that this was a dream for him, but that he might have had those limitations. Here's another way. And again, I use this movie all the time, but I've only seen it once, I think. Avatar. There's this. It's an old movie now, I think, but it's the one with the big blue people. The guy is basically his mind is controlling the body of somebody else, so he's got different things that he can do under that he can't. All right, I'm doing a terrible job of this. My understanding is this. Jesus working as a human being was him allowing himself to be limited. So there are things that Jesus could know if he wanted to know, but he chooses not to know for that time. There are things that Jesus could do if he wanted to, but he chooses not to do. We sing the song, he could have called 10,000 angels, but he doesn't. He dies on the cross, right? He could have called in an army to rescue him, but he doesn't. That is Jesus in the incarnation. It's having all of these things that he could do, but he's choosing not to. He's choosing to be human. And so that's my understanding of the incarnation here. There's the limits to what Jesus... So it could be that when Jesus chose Judas, that he did not know the ultimate outcome of that. However, we do know that at some point in Jesus' ministry, he does know, because he makes it clear, one of you will betray me. So somewhere, I'm kind of inclined to think that in all of those moments, Jesus knew that Judas was going to betray him and loved him anyway. But that's me. So Jesus gets these guys, sends them out, sends these 12 out to preach. The ministry's gotten so big that it's time to give these people the role. This makes it so Jesus' message can go out further and faster. It also means that that the disciples get some training. They go through this process that all good discipleship and teaching goes through, where first they watch Jesus do something, then they do it with Jesus, and then Jesus sends them to do it and is there for guidance and instruction. But what it does too is it gives Jesus the chance to have some time to himself as well. And so he sends them out, and it says, then he went home. And a crowd eventually gathers again so that they could not even eat. And when his family heard it, they went out to seize him, and they were saying, he's out of his mind. This is a very interesting verse here, because Jesus goes home to his family. What does Jesus have for family at this point? Apparently, Joseph was not around anymore. The other Gospels make it clear that by the beginning of Jesus' ministry, Joseph is not around.
His brother, James.
There's a list in one of the Gospels of 5 of Jesus' brothers. The Catholic Church teaches that they're his cousins. That's not for language reasons. That's because they believe that Jesus remained a virgin until the day she died. Mary. Yeah, Jesus evidently did, but Mary, the Catholic Church believes that Mary remained a virgin throughout her whole life. The Gospel said that Joseph didn't know her until after she'd given birth. That seems to indicate that he did after, and then it clearly says that they had other sons and daughters. And so that doesn't make sense to me. Plus, the word that's used for them is brothers. It's not cousins.
I also heard that they thought that they were Joseph's prior from another marriage, that he had these children already.
Yeah, there are some people who have taught that maybe Joseph took another wife, or maybe that Joseph already had kids. You run into problems there. We don't have time to track all of those down, but we know that Mary and Joseph had at least 8 children, if you count Jesus. Jesus being the oldest. Then we know we have a list of 5 brothers, and it says and sisters, which would be a minimum of 2. And so at least 8 children, which would have been a typical big Jewish family at the time. And at least 2 of those, James and Jude, later become followers of Jesus. Again, there's a bunch of James, but the one who wrote the book of James calls himself the brother of Jesus. And then the same thing Jude does later on. Here we have this moment where Jesus goes home to spend time with his family, and eventually the crowd finds him. And it stops his family from even being able to eat. There's all this inconvenience. And the reaction of his family is to be irritated and to accuse Jesus of just being crazy. So let me just ask you, if your older brother started announcing that he was the Son of God, the Messiah, what would your reaction be? I think you'd be a little doubtful, even if he was the perfect favorite. Even if he always made his bed. Even if he did his chores without complaining. People wonder why it was so hard for Jesus' brothers when they spent all that time with him to believe that he was God. I think that's exactly why it was hard. It's like how you don't notice people changing when you live with them, but if you go away and come back, have you ever had that happen? You go away for a summer and you come back and, all the kids have grown. Well, I guess they have, haven't they? I didn't notice. I think that's sort of the thing. We tend to not notice the miraculous around us. However, we do know at some point when they see Jesus alive again, they look back and they say, he's God. So you think about what dramatic change had to take place for James, being a skeptic of Jesus all through Jesus' life, to then, after Jesus dies, suddenly become one of the leaders of the church. The transformation that took place. Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon Church, his whole family was all in Mormonism, but they were from the beginning in it. They were, and it was very advantageous. They all were leaders and got salaries from the church, all kinds of things. Jesus' family were, and there were some of Joseph Smith's brothers who left the church after he died. Or said, well, it turns out we misunderstood him or his prophecies or whatever. Jesus' family didn't believe him until after he died. What happened that changed their mind? The resurrection is what Paul says, because he says he appeared to James. He appeared to Jude. Like they were able to be in the crowd that saw him. And so Jesus' family's view of him at this time is that he's crazy. He's out of his mind. There's no way he's the Son of God. I don't know how he's doing these miracles. Doesn't make sense to me. Maybe that guy's hand wasn't really withered. Whatever. But he's crazy. And he's stinking inconvenient. We can't even get any food because of all these crowds. We just wish he'd go away. And there are several times in Jesus' ministry where his family either shows up to get his attention, and you can tell there's strained relationships there, or where they shoo him away. Say, well, go get killed. Just leave us alone. And it's not until the crucifixion that they start showing up in the upper room, and they're there to see Jesus after he rises from the dead. All right, any comments or questions on any of that we covered? We'll pick up in verse 22 next week. Okay, I don't know if Mark points this out, but later on, Jesus is going to send out another group of disciples. How many does he send out for the second wave? 72. We often forget that, but it's worth pointing out that these 12 had special jobs and special powers and gifts given to them. And they weren't amazing, miraculous guys, but they were guys that God called and empowered to that role. All right, let's go ahead and pray and be done. Father, thank you so much that you gave us this time. Thank you for teaching us through your word. I pray that you'd help us to not major in the minor things and not to fall into the trap that the Pharisees and the Sadducees did, but to truly want what's best for people and not get so caught up in our own petty squabbles that we miss the bigger picture. Father, I pray that we wouldn't just be people in the crowd, but that we would truly be followers of you. That you would call us and show us and take us off the bench. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.